there was this talk of like banning books. And I remember someone mentioned it to me. Oh, they banning books, and I was like, "So what do you mean though by they're banning books?" Like, "Oh, well, the library's not stocking this book anymore." I'm like, "Well, they have a finite amount of space, so you have to select what books go there, right?" And so there's
Hmm.
some curation like involved, just like the audio collection. So it's
Hmm.
like not exactly a banning of books. And maybe you're unhappy about that particular book, but it did make me think like, so how do we choose? Like, and
Hmm.
so I like that you've answered it. It's just like, someone that goes, I like this one. This one
Yeah.
makes a good collection, just like how we would choose it at home, right? Like,
Well,
if I had a record player,
yeah.
here's what I want to throw in there. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the show that is making writers cool again, one drink at a time. I am your host, Waymar Hincy, who everyone knows isn't cool, so I'm not sure why I'm trying to make writers cool again, but here we go. And I'm really honored and thrilled to have author D.A. Spruzen with me. D.A., welcome to the bar.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. So let me give you I used to say Cliff Notes version, but now to keep it, alcohol themed, I call it the Whiskey Notes version of a bio, and feel free to add anything you would like to add or correct anything if I say something wrong. So, but you're the author of the Flowers Ladies trilogy.
Hmm.
Also the Sleuthing with Mortals series. We have the poetry collection Long in the Tooth, and as well as a bunch of short stories and some novellas. Anything else? Am I missing anything? Anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, well, I teach. I teach creative writing.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good. Very good. That's important to include. So awesome. So I would like to start us here in earnest with just kind of placing you in the world and selfishly digging for information about that place. So could you tell us kind of roundabouts where you are and where's the best place to get a drink there?
I am in McLean, Virginia. And I think, well, it depends what you like to drink. There aren't any particularly good bars, I don't think, at least not that I know of.
Sure.
But of course, some of the restaurants have excellent drinks,
Oh
especially
yeah.
the Asian restaurants. The cocktails from Chinese restaurants, thinking of Raffles in Hong Kong, where you
Uh-huh.
might get some of those delightful gin fizzes and that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, so I guess I would rely really on restaurants.
Right. Okay. Very
And we
good.
have a lot of restaurants around here.
Right. Very good. Yeah, yeah, my favorite place actually to get, I guess, to get a drink overall is one of my favorite. It's my favorite dinner spot, but because of the drinks mostly, the food is good there. But it's called Parkway Grill, and it's the same thing. It's actually in Pasadena, where the
Mm.
Rose Parade and Rose Bowl and all that is, which is right down the freeway from me. But yeah, I like that. Like, say they have the bar there, but it's like it looks like an old barn. I don't know if it really is an old barn or not, but it's an old building by California standards. So there's an
So
old
about
building that
20
they
years old, right?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's this old California standard building, and yeah, they have the drinks in there, great. So yeah, I hear you. A lot of times the restaurants now, you don't really have to go to a bar to get a great drink anymore. The restaurants and things. I've heard people call it the cocktail renaissance, actually, which is
Mm.
a
Hmm.
brilliant time to be living through. So
Right.
very good. So awesome. So I gave you the background bio, though. What I kind of like to get a sense for your author journey. Could you maybe kind of tell us like where you started writing, kind of dips and
Yeah.
valleys leading up to today?
Well, I was a technical writer, and I think it just became not enough. It was too dry, and I spent quite a lot of time doing that. I was a technical writer, then I was a writing supervisor, then for a Grumman Corporation, one of their subsidiaries, I was manager of publications. So it was high tech industry. So it was
Uh-huh.
quite interesting, but not especially, shall we say, fulfilling. And I wanted more. So I took, what did I went to the F. Scott Fitzgerald conference in Rockville, Maryland, and I submitted a short story. And I thought it was very good and I might very well win. Well, I didn't win. And when I went to the workshop where the judge was giving his comments, I found out why I didn't win. And I found out that there's a lot more to this gig than meets the eye.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so I took a few classes. Then I went to the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland, took some classes. Then it turned out that one of the lawyers who worked for my husband had a sister who was a very good instructor, Harvard degree, and what's it called? I will work writers workshop. That's right. So she was very well trained. And I worked with her for about a year, long distance. And then she said, I really think you need to do an MFA. Huh?
Right.
And she said there are non-residencies that you can take. So that what happens is you go on campus for about a week, twice a year, or 10 days, whatever the program is, and you work online with the instructors in between. It's called low residency. And I chose Queen's University, and I got accepted to Queen's. I also got accepted to a couple more. And I did my MFA, which was a wonderful experience, made lifelong friends, really honed my skills. And then I started about a year afterwards going to the Creatures, Crimes and Creativity conference, and also going to other workshops, the Tinker Mountain Writers Workshop in Hollins, at Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia. Okay. And I'm on the faculty there now for that workshop.
Oh, very cool.
So it all started with a conference where I didn't win a prize.
Very good, very good. And I'm glad you mentioned the C3, the Creatures, Crime, and Creativity Conference. I almost forgot my manners. So that's how we met. Yeah, I always like to include those things because I joke that the show is 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? It's like usually this person refers this person that, and it's really awesome. Actually, it's really fun. And it kind of went that path, but it's a tad different because there's a funny 6 degrees. The very first guest on the show, the show proper that aired, I did a bunch of shows before I actually aired any of them, but T.D. Johnston, he introduced me to James Grady, who wrote the 6 Days of the Condor that they made the movie 3 Days of the Condor with Robert Redford on. So he introduced me to James Grady, and then James Grady was really gracious. He introduced me to like 5 different people, one of which was Austin Camacho. And so Austin came on, he's on the show, and his episode aired right around C3, actually, kind of happenstance how it worked out. But his episode aired right around there. And then he was like, hey, do you want to come out and do the show live at C3? And it's funny because I'd already been working on starting to take it live and do it places. And I want to start doing some after the new year. Hopefully have some bars and things lined up to go do it. But so he was like, oh, and I was like, so I was telling my wife, I was like, oh, it'll be a good time, but also hopefully I get some more people on the show, so it's worked out perfectly. So, and then that's led you here to our virtual happy hour.
That's right.
Very good. And I forgot the other manners I forgot is I usually right after I place you in the world, I like to know what we're drinking. So what are we drinking today?
Well, we are drinking gin and tonic. However, instead of lemon, I drink it with fresh mint. This is the last mint in my garden.
Oh, wow.
It comes with its own stir. It's well muddled and it's very refreshing, especially in the summer.
Sure. Yeah, it looks refreshing. It's funny. My wife's mom lived with us for a while, and she has a green thumb. Like it's pretty amazing what she did. Because again, we're Los Angeles basically here, and so we don't have like lots of land. And our backyard, this room takes up a third of our backyard. This is an extension that was built before we were here, but takes up and so it's not a huge backyard anyways, but this takes up a chunk. There's a pool, and then there's a little patio. So there was these little strips of dirt, and we've even cemented a couple of them. And so the one we didn't cement, that's still the mint comes back like all the time. Like that mint will not die. It is the most amazing plant I've ever seen. It doesn't get watered. It gets pulled half the time because there's weeds. So I just go pull everything, which is actually kind of refreshing because then you pull some mint, you get the mint flavor. So it's not the worst place to pull weeds, but yeah, mint's amazing. So that sounds like a great drink. So like I mentioned pre-game, I stalk everyone's website. So it's always great fun for me to kind of get to learn a little bit about you kind of beforehand. That gives me stuff I want to pry into. So I know from that, so you grew up in London. You graduated from the London College of Dance and Drama Education, and then you served as the faculty of the London Theatre School. Right. So, which I love because I used to do a lot of theater. So my wife like makes fun of me because I still say I'm an actor. Do actors actually do this? I don't know. Or maybe they've stopped. But yeah. So was the theater and things? Was that kind of your first artistic love, or how did that all
It
play out?
was, well, I danced from the time, went to class from the time I was 2.5, and then went from that to college.
Uh-huh.
So, I didn't
Sure.
stop. Then I went from there to the Ada Foster Theatre School in London to teach, so I was doing it all those years.
Right.
So I didn't really think of doing anything else. And
Uh-huh.
college there was a lot of academic work as well. We had 2 solid years of anatomy and physiology.
Oh wow.
We had principles of education, we had psychology, kinesiology, psychology, music theory. So
Sure.
yeah,
Was
there
a
was a
lot
lot.
was that did that play into because some of it you can see how it would relate to dance, right? But in theater, I guess even more generally, but was that just because they wanted to make you more rounded, or is that all kind of vocational, like steering you, supposed to be directly
Yeah,
applicable
it
to
was vocational.
okay.
And most colleges and universities in England are like that. You're supposed to have gotten all the general stuff out of the way in high school.
Uh-huh, sure.
So
Makes sense.
the degree work is much more specialized.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, amen. It's funny because my brother, who probably watched this, is my loyal brother and fan, and I love him dearly. But he's him and his wife are educators, right? So they do high school and things. But it's kind of the question, like it used to be, like in America, like the high school degree was it was kind of like the equivalent of a college degree now, right? It's like, okay, you
Mhm,
graduate high school and then you can kind of get a job, and then college was either expand your mind, in whatever
mhm,
way, or you become a doctor or something, right? You need something
right.
that takes a lot of like extra time, but that seems to have changed over over the years to where it's like,
Yeah.
no, now you need college to do anything. And it's like, well, why
Yeah.
did I need it to do this job? I could have done it 4 years ago, but
Hmm.
yeah.
That's right.
So it was mostly like dance related.
But it
Is
was geared
there
towards teaching the dance, not
teaching?
towards
Oh,
becoming a
okay.
dancer. Yeah.
Clickety clack, clickety clack, clickety clack. Ding. Oh, hello. You caught me right as I was putting the finishing touches on my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia. And now it is time for the long road to publication and the long editing process. As writers, we spend tons of time editing our work. The hardest part, I think, of the editing process is really like the proofreading, the copy editing, because you were so immersed in it. I've just spent 13 years immersed in Pirates, got it all together, went through, edited it front and back by characters, all these different asymmetrical ways. And still, it's going to have typos in it. And they're going to horrify me one day if I ever find those in the actual printed edition. The way I combat that is with EditGPT. You found today's sponsor. The link is on the screen now. I'm going to put it here. Here's the link. If you're on the podcast forum and you can't see me pointing up at that link, if you're on a podcast, you're really missing out. I'm really animated with my hands. But if you can't find it on there, feel free. You'll find it in the description. It helps support the show, helps restock the bar, helps keep this guy happy so that we can keep putting all these shows out there for all of you. Thanks for everything. Let's get back to the writing because Pirates of Appalachia is not going to finish itself. The one thing EditGPT cannot do is save the file for you. So I'm going to make sure to save that now. So I want to get back to my work. You get back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Did that inform any ways? Like, because you tell a story with like the movements, right? Like,
Yes.
so does that inform your writing now in any way?
In some very indirect way, perhaps, because I think rhythm is very important in your writing, the
Mhm.
cadence and rhythm.
Sure.
And that's why it's a good thing to always read your work aloud,
Hmm.
because it needs to fall into some sort of a rhythm. And it needs not, and unless, of course, you want a particular effect of being very staccato or very smooth or whatever it is. You need to have some, and you don't need to have one of those da 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 rhythms either. You need to watch out for that kind of the limerick
Right.
effect. So yeah, I suppose the music part of it does play in.
Hmm. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense that it's if you have so for poetry, right? Certainly,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Hmm.
and poets think about that a lot.
Right.
I think fiction writers, nonfiction writers, like people writing books, I think sometimes can kind of not think about it as much. But
Mhm.
if you have that same rhythm for 200 pages, it's not going to feel like things have happened. You haven't had any
Right.
rhythm to like break it. It's going to get really monotonous. So I
Right.
think
It has to
it's a great
change.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the tempo of the music has to change.
Right, right. It's like
Mhm.
when you listen to like an orchestra or something, right? It rises and
Right.
falls, you get the swells and
Mhm.
things. If it's just the don don don, and you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, okay, I can't listen to. That's how I feel like my wife and I went to one rave, right? Like with all the lights and things. We
Mhm.
were probably, even when we did this, I think we were probably too old to have gone to the rave, but that music was just doing that the whole time. And like, we were both
Yeah.
like done like 10 minutes in. We're like, okay, let's get some
Yeah.
tacos and
It's
out
just
of here.
noise. It's just
Yeah,
noise. Yeah.
sure, right.
And some books are
So,
like that. They're just noise too.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, it can be, right? It could just noise,
Mm.
or you could be, or it can just be quiet, right? You have to
Mhm.
find those peaks and valleys. So certainly.
Right.
So what led you then from London to the States?
Well, I was engaged to be married.
Okay.
And it was in the days when the green card was much easier to get. So I came with a green card.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to Ithaca, New York, where Cornell University is. And it didn't work out.
Oh, okay.
But I'd, left my job. I'd left everything behind me. So I just stayed.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and there you go. That works out. So when you were in Ithaca, because I think your website mentioned this too, I'm trying to peruse my notes. You would think, so here's, I'm gonna pull the curtain. I need a curtain effect. One day I'm gonna learn a curtain effect. The behind the show stuff is
Mhm.
that when I'm on the computer, I wear glasses. It's the what, so when I drive and when I write are the two times I wear glasses. The rest of the time I see well enough. And in fact, if I wear them too much, actually I can tell I don't see as well. So
Mm.
when I do the show, if you have glasses on, you have the light, all the light reflects and everything. So I don't like to do it. And I can see you perfectly fine. So all that is fine. But then when I try to read my notes, it's like I
Mm.
increasingly am just like 140%, 150.
Focus takes a while.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so I think, oh, so you were working at an undergraduate library. I just read the
Yes.
word, right? And I
Uh,
think you were in charge of the audio collection. Could you tell
that's
us
right.
about that a bit?
Yeah, they used to have, I had a very good budget. So I used to buy loads of stuff. And I bought these things on vinyl,
Oh,
LPs.
awesome.
And then, they were, Shakespearean plays or all kinds of things, books, poetry,
Uh-huh.
and there were catalogs and so on that I used to peruse. And then I had to transfer them onto reels. I guess they were
Uh-huh.
the big reels.
Sure.
And I had these big machines and I could pipe them into two classrooms. Pipe
Oh,
these.
very cool.
So one I could pipe overhead. So a professor would sometimes give a class in that classroom, and I could
Uh-huh.
pipe the excerpts or whatever he wanted when he
Right.
wanted it into that room. And then the other one went to individual carols. So I could pipe different things into different carols, depending on
Right.
what students were studying.
Uh-huh.
So it was,
Yeah,
it was
that's
quite interesting. Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's really interesting. How did you choose what to how did you select the selection for the library? Like, was it just
Well, I selected what I wanted.
right?
Occasionally, I would get a request from a professor, usually.
Uh-huh.
Mm. But you were restrained by what was available in the catalogs
Yeah,
too.
for sure.
And
For sure.
I had a big budget, so I really got whatever I wanted,
Right.
whatever I
Oh, that's
thought would
very cool.
fit into a good collection.
Right. Right. That's funny. I had on Kier Graff on the show, and he used to work at Booklist. And
Mm.
so saying like, Booklist is really for librarians. So it's like a brief description, like the reviews are, I can't remember how he put it, but it's like not more than like 4 sentences. Like they're very brief,
Mhm.
but it's
Mhm.
all for librarians to be able to look at it and kind of get a sense if they want to add it
Right.
the, to the library. Um, and it's funny because then it's like, well, so how do you decide like like I guess if people haven't talked about it as much, right? But 12 months ago, maybe by the time this airs, 18 months, whatever, but there was this talk of like banning books. And I remember someone mentioned it to me. Oh, they banning books, and I was like, so what do you mean though by they're banning books? Like, oh, well, the library's not stocking this book anymore. I'm like, well, they have a finite amount of space, so you have to select what books go there, right? And so there's
Hmm.
some curation like involved, just like the audio collection. So it's
Hmm.
like not exactly a banning of books. And maybe you're unhappy about that particular book, but it did make me think like, so how do we choose? Like, and
Hmm.
so I like that you've answered it. It's just like, someone that goes, I like this one. This one
Right.
makes a good collection, just like how we would choose it at home, right? Like,
Well,
if I had a record player,
yeah.
here's what I want to throw in there.
Well, I needed to make sure I had as much of Shakespeare as possible.
Uh-huh,
Things
sure.
like that. The classics had to be there. So,
Right. Yeah,
mm.
yeah. Amen. And then so you're teaching now. Is it mostly teaching adults, or are you
Yes,
teaching? Yeah.
I've always taught adults.
Okay.
So now what I'm teaching is mostly online on Zoom. It's a
Uh-huh.
critique workshop, and I'm
Okay.
doing some private coaching also on Zoom. And there are people who have been through my classes at various places, and some of them have been with me 12 years, actually, 12 years,
Uh-huh.
10 years.
Sure.
And so we meet and we critique their work
Right.
every, yeah.
Oh, very good. Do you happen, I'm flinging names out from the show here. S.J. Roseanne. Does that name ring a bell at all?
No.
Okay, because she does something, she does similar, but she has last time. So we do open bar episodes now where I bring back like 3, 4 like former guests, and then we talk a
Mhm.
lot of more writing craft those shows. Although I might pivot with that in the new year a little bit, but she does that, and she was saying like, so the last time we did it when she was on, she's like, okay, I'm sorry, I have a hard out like in an hour, so if we're running up against it, I'll have to kind of bid you adieu and go on. But they're okay. And we finished it a little bit on time. She's like, yeah, and so she had a quick second to kind of chat about it. She's like, yeah, she's like, I keep telling these guys, like, you don't need me anymore. Like, you've got it. Like, but it's become part of their process,
Right.
having everyone there and then having her
Mhm.
there to go. So now it's not so much like, oh, they need to be taught. It's just that
Right.
they've built that into their writing process and it works for them. So they don't want to, they
Well,
don't want
they've
to
all
stop.
become good critiquers now.
Sure. Sure.
So it helps
Yeah,
them as
which is a skill. Yeah.
a skill. Yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone thinks they have an opinion and that equals critique. But it may not, you can have bad opinions too, right? It doesn't mean you're
Right.
making a good critique just because you have an opinion on something. So what has teaching adults kind of taught you, generally, right? Like when you teach kids, you learn patience for sure, right?
But
And
there are
maybe
some
with
adults.
adults too.
There are some of them. The most difficult ones sometimes are the ones who have PhDs
Uh-huh, sure.
because they've written a thesis which has been accepted, so they know how to write.
Hmm.
Well, that's a different animal. Creative
Right.
writing is a different creature.
Hmm.
And it
Absolutely.
takes sometimes some patience to teach them that, show
Hmm.
them that, I should say. But
Right.
teaching adults around here is very nice. Actually, I've made a lot of friends through that
Hmm.
because we have, near Washington, so we have lots of State Department people. Um, so we've had lots of stories based on their experiences in other countries. Of course, we're lawyers, doctors, and some of those are interesting too. Um, so particularly one who is a GYN, OBGYN, he has
Okay.
interesting things to say or to write. Um,
Right.
so it's a very interesting mix.
How many spy novels? Like it's by Wafter. I'm wondering how much of it, like we need to collect the spy novels and then we can kind of see what's really happening out there because they're probably
I
based on something.
have a friend from Tinker Mountain, actually, who does write very good spy novels.
Uh-huh.
But I don't actually, oh, there's a Scottish friend who does, but I don't actually know many people who do write spy novels.
Right, right.
Men,
Well, maybe.
younger men always want to write science fiction.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's funny. There probably is, and I don't know what it is because I'm thinking about this on the fly, but I think there, like, you could actually look by, like, kind of like ages, right? So like
Hmm.
I think there was a time where most kids were really into like spies. And
Yeah.
it's like, you want to be something, but more of the fantasy, right? Like I want to be a
Hmm.
Jedi or something, right? I think there was a very strong like little like period
Hmm.
there where spy was it. Like James Bond, like these
Hmm.
things, you wanted to be a spy. But now I think a lot of the interest from spy, I think it has gone more to like sci-fi, probably
Hmm.
some fantasy, maybe some thrillers, but I think a lot of them have gone more towards that versus the spies and like the cool, like the fantasy kind of job as it used to be.
Well, the historical novel I wrote called The Blitz Business, that does feature a spy, actually.
Oh,
And the
okay.
sequel
Very
will
cool.
also feature a spy. In fact, a member of the peerage who was a German agent.
Very cool.
So, yeah, I've written about spies, but not in the sense of a friendly spy, one
Right.
about who and
Right.
his exploits and his daring do and all of that. No, they're enemy spies who are in England
Sure.
during World War II
Mm-hmm.
and how they were rounded up. And
Right. Yeah.
I had
What
to do a
was
lot of research for that.
Right, right. Yeah. So where did the idea for that come from? Was it just you had, because I mean, I always wonder about like the historical fiction, because sometimes you have it like someone that's a history teacher
Hmm.
and they have a certain period, they love it,
Hmm.
and then they're in it all the time teaching it and they have an idea. Where did the idea for that, for those historical novels come from?
Well, my parents went through the war in a suburb of London, and they talked about it a lot, even way afterwards. For example, my mother, and I think most English people still do this, closes the curtains all over the house. She closed
Uh-huh.
the curtains every night, the drapes. And she
Sure.
called it, I have to do the blackout, years after the war ended. And the hoarding, she used to hoard food. Like
Sure.
my father was incensed because he was clearing out this huge larder we had because we were doing
Yeah.
renovation. And he counted 21 packets of tea. And, you know, so that sort of insecurity
Uh-huh. Sure.
lasts. And I have this memory. I was very young and I was sitting in one of the living rooms and my father was prying up the floorboards. And he brought out this big tin of something or other. I think it was ham, actually, and a few other
Uh-huh.
tins. And
Right.
he said, I was not to tell anybody about this or speak of this. And so here am I telling everybody, right? So,
Right.
um, so he'd obviously stashed it and forgotten about it.
Sure. I mean, I
So,
get it, right? That like the squirrel with the nuts, right? Like it's
mhm.
a instinctual thing. Like you get
Yeah.
it in the States a lot. And unfortunately, right, it's just time rolls, right? You start to lose the generation that went through it. But with
Mhm.
the Great Depression, there
Mm.
was a lot. The people that went through that, it was
Well, he did too.
always,
They did too.
yeah.
Because he went through, he was born in 1902.
Oh wow.
So
Sure.
he
Yeah.
went
So he was
through World War One, the Depression, World War Two.
right.
So he was very thrifty
Mm-hmm.
with
Sure.
food and so on. He
Right.
went to waste food.
Mm-hmm.
That was a cardinal sin. Yeah, and they tell stories. I remember a story of him. He was in what do they call it, a vital industry or something like that. He was managing director of a firm that made davits, which are the instruments that lower lifeboats.
Okay.
And so he was not drafted, and he got too old anyway. He was 45, I think, when the war started.
Uh-huh.
And but he had to go man an anti-aircraft gun, sit in a field with somebody else with an anti-aircraft gun all night,
Right.
once a month or something. Unfortunately, the anti-aircraft gun apparently didn't work, but they went through the motions anyway.
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah. No, it is interesting when you
Mm.
when you think back to it, because I know like my dad, so I was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, because my dad
Mm.
was going to the college there, the West Virginia University, WVU, and they were really broke. And it's been like so my dad has cancer, and so he ends up. There's a cancer hospital my wife works at called City of Hope, and this isn't a good thing. And my dad also listens to the show. Dad, love you. So not a good thing, but one of the you have the trials, right? And then you also get some of there's pluses to it, is that we've had lots of conversations, right? So when he's there, we go and and so lots of times when he's there, and especially some of the late night ones, I'll go and and for whatever reason I can't, or either he gets there late or I can't get over until late, and then so I just I don't like him to sit there all day, be by himself. So I'm like, okay, I'll go over at 11 o'clock or whatever, just to make sure he's had someone hang out with him for a bit. And that was some of the conversation. I didn't realize how broke they were, just how impoverished they were. At some point they were living in a car for a few days. And as my older brother mentioned earlier, Mike, I guess, was definitely, I mean, Mike has a different dad. My mom had my brother Mike with another man when she was younger, and then she marries my dad, right? And so when he first finally started making money, he got done with the degrees in the Air Force, finishes up in the Air Force, he goes into aerospace, and he's doing well. But there was a strong sense of oh, you're not just buying everything. I want to just the hoarding the nuts was put money away, because who knows, who knows what's going to happen with all this. So I
had a bedspread made of parachute silk.
Really?
The wretched thing kept sliding off. I mean, it was ridiculous.
You jumping on the bed, you just shoot off, across the room.
But anyway, as far as that, so I'd heard all the stories and so on and so forth. Still had to do a lot of research, because things are different from hearing stories to how they really are. But also, the protagonist of that book is a 15-year-old boy with mild retardation. And it's not all in his point of view. That could get tedious, of course. But,
sure.
But I was on the board of Langley Residential Support Services for about 10 years. And we supported adults with intellectual challenges in their day-to-day activities. We had houses, helped some of them who lived in apartments, and so on. So Jamie is a composite of about 3 young men I knew through that work. And it was important to me to present such a character in a very rounded way, without stereotypes.
Sure.
So that he had needs and desires, and just like everybody else.
Right.
So with those two things that were, the war loomed large in our family background, and then this work I did with those people, and really wanting to present them or represent them in some way, some positive way.
Sure. Well, I think what's nice, I like that you said that too, the rounded, is that it's nice to actually be able to see the humanity in someone. I always say, reading, and I know they've done studies on this, and I don't know if it's probably one of those chicken or the egg kind of things, but readers score very high on empathy. And so it's hard to say if you're empathetic, do you like reading, right? So it's kind of the chicken or the egg with it. But I think that really it's when you read, you literally are mentally forced to kind of walk in someone else's shoes. Right.
Yes.
So I take that book up. You really have to internalize it in a way you don't with the screen. Right. That screen's this flat thing there. You can ignore, you can look at your phone, whatever. You read, you can't doom scroll on your phone while you're reading. Actually have to sit and internalize the words. And so when you actually round out a character and you see that, someone with whatever the disability is, autism, whatever it might be, well, that they can have desires, that they can also make mistakes. They can also do things, right? They're not the perfect angels either. Yeah, because I sometimes right. Yeah. So you see, and it's my grandson's autistic. I was talking with his mom about it. And it was Einstein didn't talk for 3 or 4 years. He certainly would have been on the spectrum. The not talking for that period would have put him on it. So there's it doesn't mean you're not talented. You're just not in that bell curve
Mhm.
of the
Right.
sameness. So being able to actually find the humanity in them, beyond the bad or the good, and show them in a way. I applaud you for doing that. I think it's
Mhm.
lovely. It's one of the greatest gifts of fiction, I think, that it gives. So thank you for that.
Brief interlude from the show. As you've heard me say ad nauseum at this point, the very best way to support the show is to buy a book. You're hearing all about my guest work during the show, so now if you want to take a moment to watch a cinematic trailer of one of mine, I'd certainly appreciate it. And if you're intrigued and so inclined, we'll have links where you can pick yourself up a copy. Thanks again, and cheers.
Are we bad people who sometimes do good things? Or good people who do bad things?
I did want to touch on something because I did notice on the website too that I think you do, what if I can read my notes, visual arts, right? You do acrylics,
Right.
watercolors, and things.
Right.
So with it, because I'm very into, like, generally storytelling, right? I think storytelling is it's a sacred art, right? It's been around
Mhm.
forever, right? We told stories
Right.
about the stars. We had oral storytellers and
Mhm.
things. Does that, so we talked about dance a little, does the visual arts, does that inform your book writing at all? Like the storytelling there, or?
In some ways, I guess it helps me visualize, for example, a setting
Uh-huh,
and how I
sure.
want to present it. I visualize a lot of things when I'm in bed at night and the lights off, my eyes are closed. I
Mm-hmm.
might run through an action scene as if I'm running a movie through my head, through my mind,
Right.
to see
Uh-huh.
if it actually works.
Sure.
I might visualize a setting, and do I want that particular light in that particular place? Is it going to be moody? Is it going to be bright and glaring?
Mm-hmm.
So I am sensitive to color, of course, and hue and shade and so on. In a way, the writing informs the art because there has to be composition
Right.
and there has to be contrast,
Mm-hmm.
as there does in your writing. So, and there has to be nuance. So, in a way, I think it's the other way around. The writing informs the art more than the art informs the writing.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's really interesting because I think, and I think, personally, I think this can be to the detriment of kind of literary writers, literatures, and books writing, is that movies has been the dominant art form. I mean, some people actually would say it stopped being the dominant art form, and it's more about, like, YouTube, things like this. They're getting bigger views than movies and TV shows kind of proper, but cinema has been the dominant art form from, geez, I don't know when it started, when it went from the motion pictures and
The
the silent
silence.
films,
Mhm.
yeah, to on, it has been the dominant one. And I think that's really informed a lot of writers, because you hear things like, I wanted my writing to feel like it's not writing. And I just wanted to feel like it's just a camera there, you know? And it's like,
Mhm.
well, that's a movie. Like, how are you going to compete with the movie? The movie's already doing that, you
Mhm.
know? Like, you have other things you can do with the writing,
Mhm.
but you're throwing away a bunch of the toolkit, you know,
Well, the thing
trying
is,
to do it. But
if you're thinking of it like a camera, all you're getting with a camera is a shot, one shot,
Mhm.
which is
Right.
all very well when you're trying to work something out, maybe, but it's very boring for the reader. Just a
Sure.
series of shots.
Right. Right. You're going to watch the movie. Right?
Yeah.
Why read a series of shots?
Or
And this, you know.
yeah, or read the movie. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know. You could go get the screenplay and have a day at it, but no one does, right?
Yeah.
I mean, screenplays you could go buy and they could be a bestseller. No one does it because you just go watch the movie. So,
Right.
but it's interesting hearing you talk about it because then it's taking the writing to it because that's how it went with movies, right? It was that there was
Mhm.
already all these books, and so
Right.
those storytellers went and then went, okay, how do I fit this in? I have all these tools now with this movie I can kind of play
Mhm.
with. And that idea, I remember I heard this in the last couple of weeks, but the writer that George R. R. Martin that did Game of Thrones and stuff,
Mhm.
and he wrote the books. He wrote this wall. I think it's just called The Wall. And he in his books, he makes it like 700 feet tall or something, right? And then and they realized this, oh, when they showed it on TV, he went, I made that wall way too tall. Like this doesn't serve. They can't shoot the arrows up there. You can't shoot
Mhm.
at 700 feet, you know? So it's that funny interplay where it's like, yeah, if you can see that scene and then go,
Right.
okay, well, maybe I went a little crazy. Like, okay, so this doesn't suit the storytelling, the purpose here, and maybe is actually kind of absurd, but it sounded cool.
Right. Yeah.
So very good. So I think so. One of them was right. It was an urban fantasy. Which
Yes. The
so which
series
series?
Sleuthing with Mortals is urban fantasy.
Okay. So I wonder if you could tell us maybe how you got started with that series.
Well, I went through a sort of a rough patch. One of my brothers died, then my dog died, then the other brother died.
Oh,
And
geez.
I just I didn't have the psychic energy to do anything. I wasn't doing any writing. It was about a year, I think. I didn't write anything. And so I shook myself and thought, this is ridiculous. You've got to do something new and different. I've been writing the sequel to The Blitz Business, another historical novel. And I just thought, oh. So you've got to do something new and different.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, fantasy. That's something I've never written before. I thought of romance novels very briefly, but yeah, it didn't quite fit me. So I thought of fantasy. And then I thought, well, what kind of fantasy? And I have always liked Scandinavia. I used to speak Swedish.
Oh,
I
wow.
visited Sweden quite a few times, took Swedish classes in London, and learned a lot while I was there in Sweden, because we had business associates of my father's, long-term family friends. So I decided to do Norse mythology.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And the protagonist I chose, she and her husband, Lynn, was this. I say this is true. What I mean is, it's true to mythology.
Okay.
Getting carried away with myself. Lynn was one of the three handmaidens of the goddess Frigg, who was the wife of Odin. So she is obscure. And her husband, Hönir, was a brother of Odin, who is very rarely mentioned in the mythology. I didn't want to get into any of that Marvel comic business, with, so many people have written about Thor and I don't know what, rather sensationalism, rather sensational. So I didn't want any of that. I have, of course, included Loki because he has become an enemy of Lynn in particular, due to the happenings in the first book. He is running a sex trafficking ring, and she breaks it up. So she's made a lifelong enemy, which runs through three books, the first three books. And Odin appears finally. Air, the physician to the gods, appears. But I didn't want to use very hackneyed memes, So those are the two gods that are spoken about in the books. Lynn hires a young girl who's just got her MFA in creative writing to be her ghostwriter. And she dictates her memoirs. She wants to dictate her memoirs. And her husband doesn't know. She keeps it a secret because he'd be horrified in case we're found out, because they're living as if they're normal people,
Sure.
It starts off in a place very much like MacLean, which I've used in the Flower Ladies trilogy also, a place called Salton. And then the books gradually move to southern Maryland, where we also have a house on the Chesapeake Bay. And they move there.
Sure. Awesome. Thanks for that. I was going to ask actually with it, because with Norse, mythology, right? It has there's the cultural imprint, but it tends to be like Thor from like now movies, but comic books like before that. And he's such a prominent figure anyways. It probably even goes beyond comic books. But so I know you kind of strayed away from the tried and true, as much as you could.
Right.
Was there any other ways you tried to keep it kind of fresh for anyone coming into it going, oh, I know more, Norse mythology, and then, give them something unexpected?
Well, yes, because it's not all Norse mythology. There are tales that she tells of her life as a goddess in Asgard. But she has come down. She and her husband were two of the few survivors of Ragnarok. In the mythology, of course, no one survives, but my mythology, they do. I've taken liberties.
Sure.
Which, you're allowed to do in fiction, right? So they've come down through the ages, many cultures, many eras, many different countries and climates. So she is telling stories of her life from all over the world in many different eras. So there's actually a lot of historical fiction in the book, which I enjoy, of course. I enjoy writing. Sure. The first book is called The Turkish Connection. There's a lot of, she has to visit Turkey and Syria to break up this ring of sex trafficking. The next book is called The Witch of Tut, and she becomes very friendly with this witch who lives in London and was one of Tutankhamun's protectors and took care of him almost like a nanny for many years until he died. So that takes us to ancient Egypt and those gods as well.
Sure.
And then the third one, which is coming out in January, is The Knight, the Gnome, and the Fox. And the knight is actually, I don't know if you've heard of the Lewis chessmen.
It doesn't ring a bell.
No, okay. A set of chessmen, probably more than one set actually, that were uncovered in a storm in Lewes, one of the, is that an Orkney Isle or the Hebrides? One of the Orkneys, I think. And they are made of walrus tusks, that kind of bone, and they're carved, quite intricately carved. The Norwegians swear that they were carved in Trondheim, and the Icelandic people say that they were carved by Margaret the Adept, who was a very well-known ivory carver in Skarholt in Iceland. So there's this continual disagreement. Most of them reside.
Sure.
Most of them are in the British Museum. I've seen them. I went to see them, and they're quite comical figures, actually. And in my story, Lynn actually is in Iceland in the 13th century, late 13th century, because in those days, Iceland was a repository of culture, of poetry, and all kinds of fine arts. And a lot of that work was sent to Norway. A lot of their poets were part of the Norwegian court. So there's a lot of interplay between the two cultures. And
sure.
I opted for Iceland. And so Lynn is visiting Margaret the Adept, and she ends up having to stay through a whole winter because the ships that were supposed to be coming in the summer always to pick up the goods from Icelandic farmers and so on were blown off by gales. So she's stuck. So anyway, there's this whole story of her in Iceland, and Margaret gave her this little knight, ivory knight, which she still has
Right.
to this day.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Did that help you heal in any way? I mean, I know that,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, it sort of gets you moving,
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. I had on an author, and I'm not, she'll probably air before yours here, but we'll see how all of that plays out. But she had written fantasy and was it fantasy and sci-fi? I might be forgetting, but it's definitely fantasy, like kind of. But she wrote fiction, and then her brother had passed. Amanda Woomer was the author. I'll try to link her up here. Future me, remember to link her episode. But her brother had passed, and she had a hard time writing that, going back to that. And then when it took a hard detour and started writing a lot of like paranormal, like true crime, things like that, really went like nonfiction. So it's interesting. I hesitate to say this, right? So everyone do your own thing, but writing, it can be a therapy in a way, right? Like getting into but it's almost like it needs to, it has to be adjacent to whatever you're actually going through to be able to get the effect. So it's like, oh, look, I can go and do this. Well, I need to just switch to this, because if it's that same thing is still associated with, whatever trauma you might have went through and things. So it's,
I think part of the thing with fantasy, it's interesting that she went to paranormal and so on, is that your imagination has to fly a little bit higher and wider.
Sure.
When I write historical fiction, yes, it's fiction, but it has to be credible and as accurate as you can make it. And that I've made that true actually in the historical fiction aspects of the Sleuthing with Mortals series, that what I have written is as authentic as I can make it.
Right.
But apart from that, the actual fantasy part of it, you fly a little higher.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I see what you mean, because you have to world build, right? Like when you're writing historical fiction, you have to. We already accept this. This is reality. This is what happened. You just don't want to break that, right? By everyone's eating chalupas and there was no chalupa, you know what I mean? Like some like crazy thing, right? You need it to be consistent with the reality we know, versus when you go to fantasy, you now need to build a world that you're bringing us into, because it's a fictional world. You're creating something, and you have to bring us, and then you have to straddle that line with it being the urban fantasy with with actual historical events, and kind of find those moments where it's like, okay, this is my world, but this is something people are going to know very distinctly. Awesome. So when you're writing it, so because there's like mythological writing, right? And I know Tolkien, I had letters to this or spoke about this, maybe both, that he loved mythology, and it was about like the getting to the transcendental, kind of getting to like the bigger aspects of it. So with it, having not read the books, do you get into kind of the bigger kind of like I guess there's lots of bigger questions, but like, what's the nature of evil? What's the nature of, good? What happens like to the soul? Like, is there a soul, and things like that? Or is it more grounded in the everyday? Because there's that urban aspect of it. So how did you approach those questions?
Basically, the questions are Mary's. Mary is the writer who's compiling the memoirs and listening to all these stories. And she is beginning gradually to come around to their approach to life, in a way. The first thing is, of course, she's not very religious, but she's just taken it for granted, Christianity for granted. She goes to church at Christmas and that kind of thing, and Easter, that kind of thing, that kind of Christian. And so all of a sudden, her assumptions have to be questioned. She finally asks Lynn, the goddess, did you ever meet Jesus? Did you ever come across Jesus? I sort of remember some kind of rabble-rouser causing all kinds of,
Sure. Right.
So, the rug has been pulled from under her in that sense, which is a bit earth-shattering. Even if you're not religious, you've just taken it for granted. It's just thing. It's a fact, to you.
Sure.
And then, of course, the God's idea of justice can be a little rough.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
It's
Severe
very,
at the,
very different. Right.
Right.
Mary is in a garden. They're holidaying in Italy at a place that I've been and stayed, an art school actually, which is an old monastery, very old monastery. And it's in Umbria. And she's walking in the garden. And the garden in the story is much bigger, somewhat different from the one in real life. And this drunken tramp hobo comes out of the bushes and tries to rape her. But the god, by this time she's involved with him, hears her and comes and picks up the man. The guy is huge and very strong, of course, picks up the man and tosses him over the cliff. And she hears him scream, this scream that's sort of diminuendo, as he goes down.
Right.
And at first she said, "Oh, thank goodness," and then she realized, "Oh God, that's a bit rough."
Sure. Right.
But then she comes to accept. Oh, okay.
Right. That's funny. Well, it's funny because when you look back at like so much like the Greek mythologies, it sprang to my mind quite a bit when you're talking about justice with the gods and things, right? And when you actually read the stories, not updated for a modern audience kind of stuff, right? Like the old stories, there's lots and you don't know what to do with it. And there's almost a bit of it that I think, from a storytelling perspective, you're meant to grapple with not knowing what to do with it.
Right.
Like what do you do with this? Like, okay, it's not good to rape her, but you just hurled him off of of a cliff like right away. Like where do we go? And
then there's the sex too, because Lynn just plays around, and her husband doesn't mind because he plays around too.
Sure.
And they see nothing wrong with it because they don't have that sort of religious taboo about playing around, about adultery and so on.
Sure.
And
well, so you got to romance after all.
Oh yes, there's a romance.
I'm kidding. I was going to do romance,
but a real romance.
Very good.
A sort of unusual romance, let's say.
Sure.
Yeah. So she has to come to terms with all kinds of different ways of looking at things.
Right. Yeah. No, that's lovely. I think about that quite a bit because I think with the advent of social media, people think that there's like a monoculture, like it's all like one thing, but it's like when you go to like it's very funny because I'm the seventh William Hincy. My son is the eighth William Hincy, and this all started with a William Hennessy that came over from Ireland. Jesus. 7 generations before me, like whatever year that was, right? And then at some point, I know, really. But yeah, so at some point that got warped to Hennessy turned to Hency, and here we are. But you think that, okay, the British Isles, it's monoculture, right? And my wife's family, because my wife is Chinese, and she was born in Hong Kong, and that was around the time when the British were giving over rule of Hong Kong to China. And so lots of people got like sponsored, right? So her dad's side of the family, well, her family, I shouldn't say her dad's side, just her family, her parents and her, I guess just her. I don't think I think all her siblings who were born in America, they got sponsored by a church like in Minnesota, and came over. And then her mom's side all ended up in London. So we've gone to London, and even though I have like I think we did the ancestry, my DNA is like 33% Scottish or something, right? And then my dad's half Italian, so I have this quarter Italian kind of side, and then it's just gibberish from there. It's just a bunch of stuff from there. But when you think of it like, oh, they're all the same, but even when we were there, we're in London, we went up to Scotland. And then we went deeper into Scotland. We northern into Scotland, and we met a Scottish guy, and he was joking with us. He's like, "Yeah, no, the northern, more north you go in Scotland, the less you're going to understand everyone."
Oh, yeah.
And then we did go, and I was like, "Oh man, I am having a harder time like understanding what everyone's saying here." And then we went over to Ireland, and you're like, "Oh, this isn't like." And so people will think that about America, like, "Oh, it's all," and then you realize like. Big place. There's a lot of like, if you go to the South, you come to LA here, you go to where you're
Right.
at in Virginia around, DC and all, like it's wildly different. There's really not the monoculture. So grappling with those questions of, oh, this is the social norm is an important question. Like you got to realize,
Right.
oh, okay, well, we think it's a social norm, like get married and that's what you do. But there was lots of cultures throughout time, and I'm sure to this day that it's like, yeah, no, the marriage and sex isn't like like an absolute for every culture, right? Like
Look at the English language. It's an absolute polyglot. I mean, it's it's a mongrel.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Yeah, I'll be right with you. Oh, hello. Fancy meeting you here on the show I host and edit. William R. Hincy, I'm taking a break from my hosting gig at Writers Drinking Whiskey to look oh so stylish and oh so suave in my Firmoo glasses. As you guessed it, that is today's sponsor. If you'd like to get a 50% off already affordable glasses, with tons of selection, you can use the promo code maybe here if you're on the YouTube box and you see my hands. If you're listening on a podcast, you can find it in the description. So check out the link, get your 50% off, support the show, and support restocking the bar behind me because it is an expensive chore to keep that puppy up. Thanks, everyone. And as we used to say in the 80s, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Awesome. So thank you for all that. So I have a very special portion of the show. I think I tried to do this at the C3. I had 20 minutes with everyone, so I had to fast forward the show. But I do it every episode here. I call shots. So you don't have to do shots. You can just take drinks from your things, but it'll be rapid fire questions and some trivia because I'm going to start a leaderboard here for the trivia. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so here we go. So with your initials being DA, I thought we would start with some trivia related to famous DAs of like film and literature, as in district attorneys. And I was very loose with this. Just think attorney, like.
Sam Waterston.
And if you, huh?
Sam Waterston.
Is he one of them? I don't know if he's one of them or not. Okay, we'll see. We'll see if he comes up.
That was what, LA Law?
Oh, you might be good at this because one of the questions is related to like law and order here.
Yeah.
That's going to be the first one here. So, Assistant District Attorney Alexandra Cabot is a fictional character on this long-running crime drama.
No idea.
So it's related to Law and Order, but it's one of the spin-offs.
Okay. SUV?
Oh, you got SVU, but you got it.
SVU.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
SVU, sorry.
My wife got really into that show. And
Yeah,
she was
I
like
liked
the
it.
first one. Yeah, I think it's still on. It has to be on like 97 seasons now. But she had like an attorney came after her when she left the show. And I always call all the other attorneys discount Cabot. She like stop being mean to them. Like Cabot would have got them convicted. So this ADA was the lead prosecutor for the O.J. Simpson trial.
What's her name? Marsha. Marsha, can't remember her name.
Superman?
Reeves?
Clark Kent was what I was going for. Marsha Clark.
Oh, Marsha Clark.
Very good. You got points for that one anyways. And so here's one. So there was 2 presidents of the United States who have served as DAs. Can you name one of them?
Trying to think when they had district attorneys, which they didn't always. Was Lincoln one of them? Did they even have a district attorneys then?
He wasn't one. And it's One of them shares a name with me. Speaking of
That's
Williams, no. So it was James Polk and William McKinley were
okay.
the two that served as there's some different names. There's like county, whatever it might be,
Okay.
but this is all by the Google box, So
Well, if you ask about English kings and queens, that's different.
that's true. That's true. But I was going with initials,
Right,
there's
I know.
tenuous threads we keep here. And then last one for the trivia. This Gotham City district attorney becomes a criminal mastermind after a mobster throws acid in his face. This is a Batman, Gotham City
Mm-hmm.
Batman district attorney has acid thrown in his face.
That's not the Joker, is it?
No.
No, I don't know.
It's Two-Face. It's Harvey Dent / Two-Face becomes the character there. Awesome. So
Yeah.
that's
Sorry about that. I failed on
Oh.
all points.
No, I think you got one. I think you got Law and Order SVU. So I forget who I was joking with. I have to do it at some point. I was like, I'm going to do a leaderboard for the ridiculous trivia I do, and it has no like concrete sense in life because it's just whatever I Google box. One of the answers to the last one had a lady on that did a book called Killer Moms. That was truly about moms that have become killers. And so I was like, oh, the trivia was about awesome dads. And I was the
Yeah.
answer to one of the questions,
Yeah.
So you don't
My
have
Flower
to.
Ladies trilogy actually features a female serial killer.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. You'll have to put you in contact with
And
her.
she was a mother. She was a mother.
Very good. Awesome. So that's it for the trivia portion of shots here. So regular shots, and these will all be, just rapid fire questions, but what is an irrational fear and what is something you love irrationally?
Rational fear is snakes. They absolutely horrify me. I won't even go into the reptile house in a zoo. So yeah, snakes. And what do I love irrationally? Dogs.
Dogs, okay, very good. Well, the dogs can protect you from the snakes. I remember I brought up my mother-in-law earlier. One day she was here in the yard, and she's terrified of snakes too. And so she's there, and the garden hose was next to her. So she had this hose. She was doing something. I don't know. I'm not a gardener, but she has her hose. She's hoeing something, and suddenly she's like, and she speaks Cantonese, so I don't know what she said. She starts hoeing something. My wife was like, she saw a snake. She saw a snake as she's trying to kill it, and I'm like, no, she's killing her hose. Killing the thing. So I get it. Snakes have that effect on people. What is? Is everything in England as haunted as it seems?
I don't think so.
That's not a ringing endorsement. I'm still feeling pretty haunted.
Depends on your point of view and how open you are to such things.
Very good. What is one thing you would change about your past?
I would pay more attention in school.
Okay. Very good. So, and then the best, so actually it's funny, I didn't mean to do this, but I did it. So who's the best, talking writers, the best RR? Not William Hincy, because when I say my name, I like to say like a pirate. This is writers with dual R's in the middle of their things. So J.R.R. Tolkien or George R.R. Martin?
Tolkien.
Tolkien, yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. He finished his series, so that gives you a thumbs up,
And I was just reading The Hobbit again, or listening to it, and he has these little specific details about characters and the way they move or talk.
Right. Yeah. He had a poetry to it at certain times. The way he would express something that is just, and we were talking about beat and movement. And it would just be, and suddenly there'd just be this little like different beat. You just come down here, you come up here, and it would just like crystallize something. And you just like, that was like, that was masterful. So I'm with you. All right, next question. So the rom-com trope of meeting the love of your life while walking across the street is complete crap, right?
Of meeting the love of your life walking
Yeah,
across.
while walking across the street, like crossing the street.
Well, not for me exactly.
So I told you I stalk websites. I know details before I ask these questions. So
Well, I knew my husband in Ithaca. He was a student assistant in the library. He was doing graduate law work. He's from Egypt, and it's the only way he was allowed on his visa to earn money was, I think, in the library or teaching assistant, a few of those things.
Sure.
So I knew him then. We were dating different people. So after I moved to Manhattan, I was teaching at the Fred Astaire School of Dance in the middle of Manhattan.
Sure.
And I walked across the street to get some medicine. I had a bronchitis, and the pharmacy was just across the road, and bumped into him. And that's where it all started.
Very good.
About 3 years later, and I was back in Ithaca.
Very good. And you had bronchitis and you made it across the street.
Yeah.
So that is, I always do the rom-com, like the meet cutes with something like that happens, but they never add the bronchitis details. So I think that adds, that's a ton. Very good. And so last question for our shots portion here. Favorite podcast, and why is it Writers Drinking Whiskey?
I think it's because it's light and humorous and yet asking serious questions.
Very good. Thank you for that. Awesome. So that'll conclude our shots portion here. So did you have something you could read for us today?
Yeah, I can read a little bit. This is from the first book in the Saluting with Mortals series. It's called The Turkish Connection. And Lynn is describing a time when she and her husband were visiting, looking for another place to settle because they don't age very quickly, so they have to keep moving around. And they were in Greece and they came across Hermes. And when Hermes found out that they were also gods, he invited them to visit Mount Olympus. Now, these people, Lynn and Hœnir, have a maid called Dora. And this is how they met Dora. And they are in Zeus's hall. Zeus's hall shimmered with light that tumbled off naked walls, so as torchlight caught the pastel curves this way and that. He liked to surround himself with beauty, perhaps to remind himself of what he had once been. Even immortals age eventually. His beard had turned grizzled and his hands ropey with green veins. It was whispered by some foolhardy gods that he could no longer please a woman. Not so. Hermes, always so competitive, often hinted at it, but what could I say? He would have nagged me incessantly to compare notes. Hermes was a lovely creature, but no one could compare with Zeus, even Hœnir, and I wasn't interested in fomenting a male ego trip. Hera didn't always attend the feasts. While I kept a watchful eye on her, she didn't seem at all jealous, probably because she was enjoying getting to know my husband. I wondered how Zeus allowed it. He had many dalliances, of course, but that was different. Gods got a pass, goddesses not so much. Anyway, we were watching an entertainment one afternoon when a girl burst in. The music tapered off as the gods' heads pivoted to stare at this apparition. Someone dressed like a nymph and trying to glide along above the surface of the flower like one, although her feet kept bumpity-bumping across the marble. Shockingly, she was fat, disheveled, and tear-stained. The circlet of oak leaves she wore on her head showed she was a dryad who belonged in woods and glens, not here in this great palace of intrigue and debauchery. The immortal dryads are all slender and beautiful. No one had ever seen anything like it. Zeus recovered himself after taking in the spectacle. What do you want here, girl? Why do you look like that? You're a disgrace to your kind. His face got redder as he clenched and unclenched his massive fists while thundering at her. He didn't appreciate nuisances. Besides, everyone knew he liked to go down to the woods on Earth now and then to play with the dryads, frolic around in the streams, and dance naked in the woods before taking his pick. This girl's appearance offended his sensibilities. The girl was sobbing a flub by this time, no doubt hoping to arouse pity in her lord. She was barking up the wrong tree. Pan did this to me. Look at me. How can I appear to travelers like this? Well, since the only reason you girls show yourself to travelers is to frighten them, I don't see the problem, was his callous reply. With that, she wailed like a fury. not realizing that female scenes enraged Zeus. So, girl, why did you do it? She gathered herself somewhat, perhaps noticing that Zeus's scowl had only deepened. He wanted to despoil me, and that is not my destiny. Besides, he's ugly and stinky. When I ran from him, he said he'd make sure no one else would want me and cast this spell. Zeus burst out laughing, and the whole court joined in. I kicked her ear when I noticed him guffawing. It wasn't funny. The girl had been humiliated and ruined. When Zeus stopped laughing, everyone else stopped too, as if he'd blown out a candle. We all stayed still and silent, waiting to see what the big bully would do. What is your name, girl? Dora. Well, Dora, you cannot fulfill your destiny looking like that. You will walk among humans. You are to serve them for the rest of your days. That is your new destiny. But Lord Zeus, can you not remove the curse, please? You know I am immortal. You will banish me forever? Her voice rose to an ugly shriek, her eyes swollen and piggy in the rolls of fat. You are stupid, girl. Would it have hurt you to give a god a few moments of pleasure? Who are you to refuse any one of us? I will not insert salt pan for such a lowly one. You will become a serving wench to humans. The poor girl drooped pale and shaking, shocked into silence. Sorry. Go, he shouted, thrusting forward his right arm to point at her, and then down to earth. She disappeared. Sorry about that. So Dora disappears down to earth, and about 1,000 years later, Lynn sees her again. And through one way and another, she becomes her maid.
But yeah, no, thank you for that. So if there is a way, like someone wants to learn more about you, I can certainly link up the website, but is there anywhere else you would direct them to?
Well, maybe, yeah, the website is best. Yeah, because
Okay.
that also has contact if they're interested in contacting me.
Sure. Very good. So I'll include the website down the description here on YouTube, and anyone listening to this on the podcast forums, it'll be in the description, so you can find it there. And so I like to say it's last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. What the question I've taken to asking here as of late is, what is something you've learned from reading or writing or both that you don't think you would have gained otherwise? Like, what's something uniquely that you've gained uniquely from kind of the literary arts here?
I think discipline, basically. Now, of course,
Sure.
it's different. I learned discipline certainly as a dancer. Ballet is extremely disciplined,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more discipline imposed upon you that becomes a habit. The discipline of writing and meeting deadlines, which I learned as well as a technical writer, because that's all deadlines.
Sure.
And if you miss the deadline for a proposal, you lose the deal, you know.
Right.
So that's a different kind of self-discipline, to
Mm-hmm.
pace yourself
Right.
and
Yeah.
to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah, because I mean that's the thing, right? Is I always tell people, right? Like, if you're a writer, you write things, then you're a writer, right? Like, I don't like, oh, you've been a bestseller. Like, people put these weird, categories on it. But to me, I'm like, you actually sit down, you do the work, you're a writer. Wherever it goes from there, it goes from there. The success, however you value success, however you view it, that a lot of that is just to the gods, right? Like, it just goes. But you have to sit down and do the work, and no one is making you, right? Like, that makes you become, a fiction writer or something, right? Or like to do these things. That's something you're choosing. So yeah, I can see that completely, because yeah, you have to have the discipline to sit down and
You also
do the
have
work.
to set your ego aside.
Yeah.
There's plenty of rejection, plenty of criticism.
Right.
You have to take it, deal with it.
Right. Right. Amen. Yeah. That's what I try to teach. I've tried to teach my kids over time is there's no like getting away from ego. We have an ego, right? You have to be able to learn when to set it aside. And then even more valuable can be when you learn to gear your ego to what you want, right? Like, so like my ego is around, I want to make the best product I can, but I choose what that best is. No one else is. So then I go, okay, and so I'm not going to like, send this off to an agent or something yet. I'm going to get this to where it's in that form that's really ready. And then my ego isn't hurt if they reject it, because my ego was around making the best product there, right? So if you find those little tweaks, it can help. So anyways, awesome. Thanks for that. And thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real blast getting a
thank you for
chance to
having
know
me.
you. Yeah, very good. Any parting thoughts? Anything else you'd like to extend out to the audience before we call it a night?
No, I don't think so. I think we've well covered it.
Very good. I like to be thorough, so
You were indeed.
very good. So thank you again so much for being on, and cheers to you. I have my whiskey and my wooden cups is
Cheers to you too.
my general thing here. Extra shots. Question for the community: what is something you've learned about yourself through books, through fiction, that you don't think you would have learned otherwise? I think storytelling truly is a sacred art, and maybe the most sacred art. We really learn so much about ourselves, so much about the world, so much about how we fit into the universe and to the multiverse and to the dimensions, to our spirit, to everything. It informs us in ways that nothing else really does. So let me know. I'd really be interested in hearing about it, your own personal experiences, and I'm really interested in building something here and with everyone. So as always, if you'd like to support the show, we have tons of ways now. We have sponsors, we have YouTube super chats and whatnot, all available to you. The very best way is always to pick up a book. All writers here, we're all very spend 7,000 hours on those 100,000 words that you're going to end up reading. So that would be the best way. So I'll include a link here with the description, with the pinned comment, etc. If you are not inclined or just don't have the money to spend on it, you feel free. Just hang out here. We have this cool hangout bar area here, and you are always welcome, whether you're a paying customer or not. We will run you a tab, a Norm like from Cheers tab, and you can just hang out here and enjoy it, do your thing, listen to this crazy Scottish, Irish, Italian, blah blah blah, and hopefully foster something here that's meaningful for all of us. So thank you so much for continuing to be a patron. You are appreciated. You should be told that more. You really should be told that more. Thank you, and have a good night. Stay saucy, everybody. Cheers.